Welcome back to Humanities 1301 for the winter semester. This will be a lecture discussion of Chapter 1. You'll see the unit here. Again, when you look at the overview, as I have for all the chapters, I just try to give you some details, extension of some of the points that you will run into in the chapter. This is about the Lecaux Caves in France, a little about Gilgamesh, other details about such as civilization, what it is that we're going to find out, the idea about development of cities, of civilizations in that way, written languages, how important those are, different forms of government, organized religions, all those become part of what marks a civilization as a culture. You'll see the learning objectives and then the links. Now when you click on these, sometimes you'll get a message saying that, oops, something went wrong. If that happens, as I explained in the previous video, just go back to the textbook material and click on that link up there to open up the textbook, and then you should be able to get into all the chapters after that. This is a preview in case you're wondering. This is an image that has been recreated of King Tut based upon his the mummy that was behind that gold funeral mask, which everyone knows so well. But this is a reconstruction they did with computer simulation of how he probably would have looked. So again, details are offered there for you. As you go through the chapter, they offer you some idea about what is called before history or prehistory, prehistoric. Basically meaning before something was written down is all that they're talking about in that way. These are several different details here. This is a recreation of the mammoth bone hut using a bone from mammoths to create a dwelling. Paleolithic, which literally is just one of the time periods. And if you click on these blue, it'll give you a detail here. Lith means stone. Paleo means old. So we really strict ourselves in naming the time periods. You have Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. And those simply mean old stone, middle stone, new stone. But you'll see the details here. We don't always think of this, but this dates back, as it says here, 130,000 years plus. This was either a bracelet or a necklace. You can see the details where you have the, here, let me raise it just a little bit, that there are holes that have been drilled in so that some sort of connection, some sort of leather or maybe some other aspect, a string of some sort could be used to connect all these together. And so we know that 130,000 years ago, jewelry was important. This is a small, again, very small, where something would have been used to create paint. You have this one. Supposed to be the hand stencils. It's not calling up. Let's see if we. This is part of the hall bowls. This is in the Lecaux Cave. This is a music instrument. It's seemingly some sort of flute. Let's see if we can get this one to call up. Nope, it's not calling up. But this is another little figure. It's called the Venus of Willdorf, where basically it was stored down and found. It seemed to be some sort of ritualistic figure. You'll see these are Neolithic again, new stone. This is the remains of Jericho. For those who are familiar with the biblical story, there was a Jericho. This is what it looked like, in the sense of the walls that were around it, as you can see. This is, of course, Stonehenge. Again, interesting stories about Stonehenge, what it was for, not quite sure. It's been proposed for a number of different areas, including as a burial site, because a number of graves have been found in this region. Your commentary here offers some of the views about it, that what takes place, and again, it also offers here that about civilization, what has to be part of a culture in order for it to be considered a civilization. Some sort of urban life with construction of permanent settlements. A government system must be put into place. Social classes emerge. Tools of specialized skills. written communication of some sort, and shared religious beliefs. All those help make civilization. Again, found throughout the different regions of the world are some of these figures that seem to be worship figures related to female forms. This idea about life being part of that. So the ritualistic aspects about giving birth. One of the earliest cultures we have is Mesopotamia, in what is now called the Middle East. Semitic languages developed from there, where you have this concept of shared identity as different ones, different people, including the Jewish people, come through here and they're part of this one. This is Sumer, and so you have this region here. Again, different areas are marked with the more modern names, but you also have the different views here. Here's the Sea of Ur. An important aspect of Uruk is going to be important when you look through Gilgamesh. This is what a ziggurat will look like, one of the temple of worship. This is one that is not in quite as good shape, but that's the White Temple. That's a ziggurat. You can see the carving, the detail, and the size and scope of it. These are figures that would have been placed at the temples. Here's an example of writing, cuneiform. I have that one on our welcome page. And then you have other writing. This is a music piece, actually. Again, notations of how the music should be played. All this is part of this era. This shows you to the gods and goddesses. You get that a little bit bigger too. And you'll see some of the names that are multiple names, because not every area kept the same name. You'll see different ones at different places. For instance, the goddess Ishtar is how it normally is known, but you'll see other names. They have Inanna in that way, but Ishtar is one that you see more prominently. Again, Gilgamesh, important story. It's one of these that came along and was found really in the 19th century, and really wasn't understood until the early 20th century. And it caused some issues. The small clay tablets that were found contained the story. They knew the story had been around for a while, but this was the first time it was actually found and written out. And one of the biggest issues, especially with the 11th tablet, there's a story of the flood there. Now the issue becomes, you say, what's so controversial about that? It set back theologians, because do you claim Gilgamesh's version of the flood being original, and did the Hebrews take it from there? The story of the flood, of course, would be Noah and the ark. Well, this has a story of an Upishtim and an ark, and idea about saving animals and all the details there. And again, part of the issue is, well, did the story just get told differently by the Sumerian culture, but it originates with the Hebraic culture, that their story is the one that we should recognize as original? Or did the Hebrews take the story from Gilgamesh and just adapt it later? And the reason you say later, if I go back to the map here, you'll see Ur right there. Well, when we eventually get to other areas, in the textbook, the Hebraic people trace themselves to Abraham. Abraham, at that time known as Abram, was called out by God to leave where he lived and to go, and God would lead him to a promised land. The place that Abram left was Ur. So did he take the story, is it coming from the Sumerian story and just altered over the years until the Hebraic people wrote it down? Or is it original? That caused controversy when this was found, and the story of the flood was recognized about religious circles. We weren't very happy with this. Again, Mesopotamia became a really part of trade using the rivers. You have then the rise of the Akkadian culture, Babylonian culture. This is, again, a bronze mask. It has been damaged over the years, as you might expect. But you see the intricacies, the detailing that is formed of this casting here. the way the appearance is. Now the beard, if you'll notice, looks really, really tightly done, but the idea is that there's a good chance that this may have been an artificial, a false beard that was put on by the leader to emphasize his authority. And we're going to see this idea about a false beard being applied later with the Egyptians. They also use those. This is a tablet, again, showing conquering of people. And quite often, whenever you have a larger figure and the smaller figures, guess which one's the conqueror? Yeah. So you have those. Again, as part of what we have is the Code of Hammurabi, part of the organization of the civilizations having laws, government in effect. It was in this way that Hammurabi, ruling his kingdom in Babylonia, from top to the northern part to the southern part, to make sure that everything was handled equitably, that laws were enforced in the same way. You had these steles put up where you had the Code of Hammurabi inscribed, where it says, here's what happens, and this is how this situation should be dealt with. And you see some examples here of what can happen. And there are others too. I mean, it's quite a bit. Rising later will be the Assyrians, who really came through with the chariot. They were one of the first ones to use it. This is the Ishtar Gate, again, taken out of the area, reconstructed, is now in Berlin. But you can see the details and the highly ornate style. That's going to become copied later and reinforced later with the different styles of this region. Where you have the arches, you have the use of the colors, and the use of depictions. And little, the idea about the bordering here that is used becomes really important. Persia grows and becomes a very dominant culture. This is a frieze from Persepolis. It was now modern day Iran. And so you have a growing group. We have Cyrus, then later Darius will become another key leader of this area. They, of course, during this time, they push all the way into, again, next chapter, Greece, where they attempt to take over those. But they are defeated eventually by the Greeks. Anyway, now we get to ancient Egypt, which is probably the culture you're more familiar with. We're going to get a little bit of time for them. Now, with Egypt, the north is called Lower, the south is called Upper, because it's the direction that the Nile River flows. It's the upper part of the Nile is down here, where it starts, and then it flows into the Mediterranean. So this is the lower part of the Nile River. So Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt. We generally think of this area as the most common part of Egypt when we think about the Egyptian pyramids, etc. Most of those, the larger ones, were up here. But really, the culture of Egypt was centered more here than any place else. We have Luxor, you have Thebes. These were the capital cities, Karnak. It was not until later that you start having some of these being developed. These were more, shall we say, Heliopolis, for instance, and the Giza, which is quite often you're going to say Giza. This is where they put the pyramids. It's not so much where the ruling took place of the kingdom. It's instead where monuments were raised. And that became an important aspect. And you're going to have other monuments also in the Valley of the Kings, which is down this direction. And so it talks a little bit about we name these eras so articulately. You have the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Literally, that's what they call it. Old, Middle, New. And then, of course, after the New Kingdom, what do you have? Well, you have the late period, which basically is the falling of Egypt as a separate culture. They get taken over by the Persians, and then later, in the 300s BCE, they fall to the Greeks. You have the Egyptian religion, which is really sort of a way of connecting all. They have Amen-Ra. They have it A-M-E-N-R-E. Quite often you'll see with A's here, or O-A-M, O-N, or A-M-A-N, and Ra, R-A. He was the head god, the one who was the sun god, who traveled across the sky. He had different names for each time period. You have children of Ra, or also siblings of Ra. They're both. But you have Osiris, who's the god of the underworld, after he is killed by his brother Set, who is the god of chaos. You have Isis, who was sister and wife to Osiris, and gathered his pieces together and brought him back to life. You have Horus, who was a major god for the pharaohs. He's sometimes the brother, but more often the offspring of Isis and Osiris. You have other ones, including a series of different gods who have different purposes. Many of them are associated with animal images. Quite often, all the gods are depicted sometimes with partly animal images. Horus is often shown with the image of a hawk, falcon. You have Anubis, who was one of the who leads the souls to the underworld. He's presented with a jackal head. It's just different views that they have. Eventually, writing was developed in the form of hieroglyphics. It's not until the 19th century that the hieroglyphics were actually deciphered and wound up being understood. The Rosetta Stone, as it mentions here, had 3 languages on it, including the hieroglyphics. You had a form of Egyptian language called Demotic, and then Greek. And what was recognized eventually was that it was the same message in all 3 languages. The Greek was understood, and they started recognizing some of the demonic, and then they realized that it's the same message. So clearly, the hieroglyphic message was also saying the same thing. They just had to work it back, figure out what each of the words were, and they eventually that's how hieroglyphs were deciphered. Again, you have a list of the different gods. The Old Kingdom, this is Narmer, palette. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you see a larger figure, you know which one won. And Narmer, this is the front and back of it, if you will. Narmer is one who's generally credited with uniting Upper and Lower Egypt into one kingdom. There are some interesting aspects about that figure, about who he was, where he came from. It's never quite clear about Narmer. The likelihood is that he probably came from Upper Egypt, southern part, and possibly even further to the west, maybe Central Africa. And then eventually the people he led moved through and up into what is Eastern Africa and up into what we now think of as Egypt. Again, you have this idea about the Book of the Dead, also known as the Book of Emerging Forth into the Light. Literally, when you died and you were buried, hopefully, if you're a prominent person, you were mummified and put into a nice place. You had, when you awakened to your new life, and you were wondering, well, what do I do now? Now that I am dead, well, you have a book. It was buried with you, and you could simply take out your manual to know, now that you are dead, welcome to the underlife. Here's what you need to do first. And literally, it had the steps of how to deal with the afterlife. It has spells, other aspects. It says here to facilitate passage through the underworld and into the afterlife. Judgment took place, and the judgment was an important aspect because you would be judged by Osiris, who's here, usually shown as blue. You'll have the scale here. This is Anubis walking the soul. Literally, the heart would be taken. The heart was viewed as the center of the soul of the person, and it would be weighed against the feather of truth. And if your heart was as light as a feather, then you were able to go into the afterlife. If you, as it says here, having a heavy heart, then your heart will be eaten, and you'll be lost forever. Literally, that's how it was part of it. So the feather of truth would be put on it, so you hopefully have a heart as light as a feather or lighter. But if you have a heavy heart, which means you have in some way committed the sins here, which are listed for you, and you have lied about to Osiris, then you would be, your soul will be lost. Architecture, you'll see some of the early, this is Imhotep step pyramid, the idea about building those and steps. This is the image of the greater pyramids up in Giza and that area outside of Cairo. This is Cairo in the background. Now, quite often when you see pictures of the Great Pyramids, you don't see this urban sprawl back behind them. They try to take shots so that you're not seeing that. The desert is out this direction. But this is literally a major issue. The pollution generated in Cairo, in the city here, has impacted and caused deterioration of the pyramids. The image of the Sphinx has not been restored because literally it was carved out of the limestone here. This is not a statue that was made and brought in. This was carved in place. And so when this was destroyed or damaged over the years, there's nothing you can replace it with because it wasn't like a part of a statue in the sense of something that was made and then brought in. This literally was carved out of this area here. This is an example of Khafre, who commissioned the Great Pyramids, where you see him again in the sense of quite a large position. You have Horus back behind him. Let me see if I can get this raised up for you to see this a little bit. You can see the image here that is offered and the detailing that's presented. All this is part of what we see with the statuary and the style. You see the face staring straight ahead, very simple. Here's the beard I was telling you about earlier, the use of a false beard being added to emphasize authority. See the detailing here, trying to recreate, if you will, almost realistically, how the figure looks. Sculpture is part of it. It says here, you have a canon of proportions that are laid out, how things should be done, how it should be worked on. You start having other styles as well. The Middle Kingdom continues with this. The idea about instructions to father and son, what to do, how to act, can be very interesting. The New Kingdom comes along. You have Hatshepsut, who was a pharaoh and a woman. It says here the ceremonial false beard, seen in sculptures of male pharaohs. She would wear it too, which gives us the idea that maybe the beard was really just a false beard, and that it wasn't something that they actually grew. This is Ramses, the Temple of Ramses. These are approximately 65 feet tall. You see some have been damaged over the years, but this enters into his temple. This is the Temple of Amun-Ra, the idea about the hall of pillars, where it literally just a series of pillars all the way through. It tells you a little bit about this colonnade here, and Hatshepsut, this idea about how it is, Ramses, and then the 26-foot high wall, basically. It's 250 acres overall. We look at each of the columns, a total of 134, as your book says. They have a height of 75 feet overall, just one after another after another. And later pharaohs would add to this and use it as well. In the middle of this new kingdom, you have Amenhotep IV succeeding his father, and he takes a new name. He takes the name of Akhenaten, and he changes the religion. Previously, you had the list of all those gods that they worship, so it's polytheistic. He changed the religion to monotheistic. Literally closed the temples, had new temples built only to Aten, which was the sun, literally the disk of the sun was the god, and had a new capital built in Amarna, and so that's why it's called the Amarna Revolution here. He had new buildings built, new temples, literally closed the other ones. This is a image of his wife Nefertiti. It's currently in Berlin. But what happened was that he changed everything, which did not sit well with those priests who were the priests of Amun-Ra, priests of Horus or Osiris, because suddenly they were told they were out of a job. This gives you an image. Previously, when we had seen the depiction on the, for instance, the Narmer palette, Narmer is presented as larger, much more of a kingly presence. This is one that was found, don't have very many of these, of Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their children. You can see that he's not being presented as any larger. I mean, they're basically equivalent in size. The children and the way their heads are looks a little out of proportion. He's got a gut, if you can see it here. Thin legs, thin ankles, thin arms. He's not being presented as this dominating, authoritative figure. It's much more, of a realistic, I guess we could say, image. But not much was done with when he dies. It doesn't last long. When he dies, everything goes back the way it was. The religion of worship of Aten disappears. They go back to polytheistic views of religion. Amarna is closed, and they go back to Thebes as the major city. All this has changed, and how it changes is because of this figure, Tutankhamun, the son of Akhenaten. The idea of, it says in his short life, he's not very long, he was the one that, as a boy, he was influenced, and they went back to the previous religion. When his tomb was found in the early part of the 20th century, 1922, by Howard Carter, the reason it was found was because of Akhenaten, his father. They literally wiped out references to him. That palette that we saw with the inscription and views and images of them, that's one of the few we have. References to Akhenaten were literally scraped off. It's been later able to be revealed through modern technology, but they literally were just scraped off and forgotten. Tutankhamun comes in, and his name is taken to Tutankhamun, so Amun-Ra, where previously he had a slightly different name, ending in Aten. As a young boy, he comes in, died about 18 or 19, and he's buried in the Valley of the Kings, but he's forgotten because that whole period is just wiped out of Egyptian history, and they go back to how they were, which is why his tomb was never raided. People simply forgot he was there. Unfortunately, most of the tombs of pharaohs have been raided over the years. Usually within 100 years of the death, the grave robbers came in and took everything. But because Tut was forgotten, because the Amarna period was going to be wiped out, it was able to be found and be a very, of course, wonderful sight. It says here, this is so gorgeous was the sight that met our eye, golden effigy of the young boy king of magnificent workmanship. And that's how it is. And one of the interesting aspects about this, let me go back, because they don't have the image here. The death mask this is literally set over the mummy. There's actually a series of these. This is that false beard. Recently, in the last, I can't remember exactly when it took place, but not too many years ago, a curator at the museum where this is stored was horrified. He came in and found that there was epoxy glue on it. turned out that the night staff, in trying to clean it, the custodian staff, one of them broke it off and tried to fix it so nobody would notice, and he used epoxy. That's not good to put on metals like gold. They have restored it, but they were not happy about that. As you go on through again, details here, there's Rosetta Stone image, that about literature. You have different hymns written, different ones. Akhenaten composed a poem praising the god Aten. In just north of Africa into the Mediterranean, you have different cultures. This is the island of Crete, where you have what's called the Minoan civilization started, or part of it. You also have the Cycladics, the idea about those who sailed and went different places. Don't know that much about them as they go to different islands. And let me go back here in this area, you have all the different islands here off of Greece, which are now basically part of Greece. This is one that they're calling it. We know there were cultures here, and they sailed, but we don't know that much about them. And later you're going to have the Mycenaean culture grow, but these are all part of the city-states of Greece, which is chapter 2 and 3. But on Crete, we have something developed that's called the Mycenaean culture, the Minoans. Mycenaeans usually come in and attack it later. The Minoan culture, it's called Minoan after King Minos or Minos of Greek legend. The individual who really worked with this culture and finding it and doing all the excavation named it such. You had Arthur Evans, that's his name. He's the one who worked with this one. He was doing so in reaction. Howard Schliemann, the German, Heinrich Schliemann, German, had excavated Troy and later the Mycenaean civilization on the area of Greece. And so Evans wanted to find something also. So he went to Crete, where there were culture there and some things that had been found previously. And so he really started excavating. And he found ancient ruins, ancient remains. He found everything he could. And it says here, they really became serious in around 1900. A civilization older than the Mycenaeans. He's beating Schliemann there. And it says they found shreds of pottery and tablets, the remains of the temple, etc., all sorts of everything. So Evans was really happy, and he calls it the Minoan culture after King Minos, or Minos, which is in a Greek story. Were they actually Minoan? That probably is not the name that they went by, but we don't really know. We don't have any sort of depiction about how they identify themselves. Part of it is, part of the language has never been deciphered. Again, Evans did, to look at the culture there, and used just this, highly complex way of naming. Early Minoan, Middle Minoan, and Late Minoan. We're not very original when we name these. This is what the palace, part of what was found and then restored. This is a fresco that was found, again, covered up, and bulls seem to be a key part of the culture. Again, part of why he used the name Minoan, because, of course, King Minos, or Minos, it's pronounced either way, was one who had insulted the gods, especially Poseidon. And so Poseidon sent a bull out of the ocean that Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fell in love with, mated with, and gave birth to the Minotaur. This image, which is the snake goddess, they tell you a little bit about this down here. The sculptures were found. There was one called the snake goddess. Says is it really representing how it was restored? There were pieces found in different places, and Evans had his people put it together looking like this. Now, do they belong together? Maybe not. The idea about having the cat on the head is one's interesting, holding the snakes in the hands. Again, there's a good chance that several of these pieces do not belong together. but he wanted something that he could present. So Evans had his workers put the pieces together to form this statue. And later copies of this were made and sold. Again, we don't know if that's really how it was, if that's how it's supposed to have looked, but that's how it was put together. This is about the language I was telling you about, linear A and linear B. Linear B started being deciphered, but linear A still don't know. It has never been decoded. Crete seems to have declined somewhere around 1200, maybe a little earlier than that, maybe 1300 BCE. There's a supposition that maybe a great earthquake under the Mediterranean led to a tsunami coming in, destroying the port cities, which trade was important for them. Not quite sure. But the Mycenaean culture grows, and this is one that Schliemann had found. It's actually on the European continent. Mycenae is part of the Greek culture. It's in the Aegean area, that branch of the Mediterranean. They traveled to different places. They were very much involved in trade. They also invaded the Minoan culture at one time. Schliemann says was credited he had found Troy and excavated Troy. The great fall of Troy there, Trojan War, recorded in the Iliad by Homer, again, chapter 2 and 3. But he looked at the details here and found it. And then he went looking for Mycenae, and he found that as well. Again, this is in the late 19th century, where he had, again, found Troy, and then later moving into Mycenae. Mycenae, of course, is connected with the Trojan War because it's one of the key city-states that was part of the group that attacked Troy. And so you have details there. And what was discovered there was just outstanding. This is the view of Mycenae. You can literally walk up this now, and you go through the Lion's Gate, and this gives you an idea of how it was arranged. This is a steep valley going off to this direction. You have mountains around it. There's mountains back behind this way. Again, a sheer cliff here. So it was a really fortified city. This is the only way to get into it. Out here have been found remains of some other buildings, outer buildings. Probably the ones who were doing the cultivation of the agricultural areas. They lived out there. But if there was ever an attack, then they would come into the city and be protected. You can see just how fortified it would be. This is the Lion's Gate itself, named so because of the lions here. Again, you see the way that you walk into it. Now, this is modern day concrete. They have poured a walkway for you. It did not have concrete there. But you literally would walk through this gate to get up into the rest of the city. So it's very challenging to do so because you literally walk through walls. You had a corridor. So someone up here or up over here, if anyone were trying to come in, they could easily pick them off if they needed to. This gives you an idea of some of what was found. This is called the Mask of Agamemnon. Probably was not Agamemnon, but that's what it's called. But this is a funereal mask. Again, it is gold. There are other gold objects that were found, tremendously aspect. As it says here, matches Homer's description of Mycenae rich in gold. And so you have the details here that are offered. Really, really unique. And again, a number of different pieces were found. So this is the end of the chapter. And every chapter will end this way. It will give you a summary of some of the key points. When you get ready to take your reading quizzes, open up the chapters that you're going to have it for. In your case, the first one will be over chapters 2 and 3. Open it, chapter 2, open up chapter 3, and then I would go to this page, which is simply the table of contents, and go to here where it renames the title of the chapter, and then gives you some of the key points. It doesn't answer everything, but it does give you some of the key points. You can also use this table of contents. Again, you do not have a read quiz over chapter 1, but every chapter is laid out the same way. Chapter of contents, it shows you some of the details. So if you did have a reading quiz over chapter 1, ask you about Amarna, well, there you go. You just click on it, it takes you to it. So this is a really useful way of going through your chapter, looking at it, and when you take your reading quizzes or your exam, I would open up each of the chapters and then use that one, because I don't mind you using the book when it comes to the reading quizzes and the exams. I do not expect you to try to remember all of this. Anyway, this is a little detail about chapter 1, and so I'll get this posted so that you guys can get started on this.